Hello, my friends. Welcome to YouTube Institute for the week. Thank you for taking time to watch and join. We began in the book of Matthew this week, and I can't remember if I mentioned this last video, but we'll take 2 lessons per week. So each week we'll cover quite a bit of material, and obviously in this video we won't get through a ton of that material time-wise, but I would invite you on your own to make sure to read the accompanying material in the app. If you haven't downloaded the New Testament app for this class, please do so. So, according to the syllabus, at least on the app, so this would be lessons 2 and 3, Matthew 1 through 7. Next week we'll be doing lessons 4 and 5, which would be Matthew's chapter 8 to 15. So please take the time to read. And in the manual, it gives you links to other lessons, and I would invite you to do that as well. I won't normally ask you to do this, but if you haven't, will you pause and say a prayer? And what I normally won't ask you to do either is to play a song, an opening song. Let me show you. I'll put the link. I'll put the link in the comments so that you can see it. But let me X out of here. Will you? This is the. Let's see, right here. You listen to this as an opening hymn. It's called the First Noel. It's a rendition from Celebrating the Light concert. The link is in the comments. So pause, go watch that, and then come back to me if you would. I love that song, and hopefully it gets you in the mood for today's lesson. I know it's only September, but you probably know where we're going with this. I did want to introduce Matthew a little bit before we get into chapters 1 through 7, and we're just going to hit on a couple of those items from there that I felt would be important to at least talk about with you. But it's interesting, in the Christian world, there is actually quite a bit of debate whether Matthew is the author of this book. We accept him as the author, and he has a specific purpose. And each gospel's writer or author definitely have that specific purpose. And when we get to those books, I'll spend a little bit of time doing this as well. But what we know about Matthew is he was the tax collector. If you look at this famous, this is the Apostles' sculpture, and he was a tax collector. If you look at the base of his feet, there's a little bag of money. Before he became a disciple or a converted member to Christ, his name was Levi. And anyways, Matthew, and especially being the first book in the New Testament, and I think this is why it's there in this order. He had a specific purpose in what he wanted to teach, and it becomes very apparent as you look at what he talked about and what he shared. We don't often have pictures in our church of Christ wearing like a king crown, right? We have a crown of thorns, and this is one that I liked. But the intent of Matthew was to connect the Old Testament prophecies to the Savior. And he was the king. He was the Messiah. He was from the line of David that had been prophesied. And Matthew wants to make sure that that is understood, that the Savior is this Messiah that had been talked about in the Old Testament, had been prophesied about in the Old Testament. In fact, you find many Old Testament references in the Gospel of Matthew for that very reason. He is the God of the Old Testament. Now, other Christian faiths believe how that happened differently, in that who the God, as far as the Godhead goes, but we believe that Jesus is the God of the Old Testament. And most Christians do too, but when we believe that they're different and distinct people, that kind of changes what that looks like for people of other faith. But the Restored Gospel teaches us that they are distinct people, and Matthew wanted to make sure, again, that his testimony was given that this is the Messiah from the line of David. And he gives the genealogy. If you look at the first few chapters, we see a lot of genealogy given, and that is very reminiscent of what we read in the Old Testament. He also wanted people to know that, and there's some comparisons made here to Moses as a teacher, that Jesus came to teach, came to teach his people, came to teach them how to be saved. And he was the master teacher, and obviously he's more than the master teacher. And then another purpose of Matthew is to testify who Jesus was as well, or who he is, not just that he fulfilled prophecy, but his divine origin as Emmanuel, meaning God is with us, and that God truly was with us. And so Matthew makes some very distinct intents on that, and that's his purpose. And again, just to think about that, if you look at in Matthew's writings, you'll find many Old Testament references, and that he came and he saved and he was the Messiah. He came to die for us, and obviously the other gospel writers talk about that as well. But because of who his audience is, he approaches it a little bit different. I'd like you to try something as we go through the New Testament, this class, especially the Gospels, that you focus in on what you think the author wanted you to know. In scriptural words and just in language in general, I guess we say this in many instances, but I want you to try to figure out the intent of the author. I'll share some insights, but as you read and study, keep that on your mind. Well, what did Matthew want me to know? And I think you'll see some things that maybe had that not been your focus, that you will see it and feel some personal application to it. So Matthew begins again connecting us to the Old Testament, and then goes into the Savior's birth. I normally won't do this on these videos because they're short, but I do want to show you. And I know the sound is not going to be fantastic, so I apologize. But I would assume you've seen this. But this was from the church's recent production of the Savior's birth.
encostar. Mariam, افهم مريم. Gabriel, يشوع. الله أكبر. شلون ذيك؟ شلون ذاك؟ ذيك.
There's a lot that I love about this version of Savior's birth. It's a kind of an extended one, longer than we've done, and by far my favorite part is this: how it shows the wise men coming. And universally, we talk about the wise men and their journey, and often we depict them coming to the Savior as a baby, but we know it took longer than that, which indicates to me their faith and their endurance and their desire to meet Him. And I genuinely love this actor's portrayal of standing in front of the Christ child, and not the Christ baby, but the Christ child. I'm just going to give you my thoughts on this. This isn't necessarily coming from the manual or anything, but I think, as I consider what this wise man may have dealt with in life, he probably had plenty of sin like anyone else, and finally, the Savior that had been prophesied would come. In fact, Matthew's pointing out part of this. I think part of the Savior's birth. He's speaking to the Jewish people, and in Isaiah 7:14 it says, "Therefore the Lord Himself shall give you a sign: a virgin shall conceive and bear His son, and He shall call His name Emmanuel." He was speaking to his Jewish audience that this person that these wise men are now looking at is the promised Messiah. I love that. I love that the gifts that they brought Him represented something, but they were recognizing that they were receiving gifts in return. Let me end with one quick thought. As you skip over to Matthew 4, and this is a very well-known chapter about the Savior being tempted, I would just share with you, it looks to me as if Satan just wanted to tempt Jesus's divinity and get Him to forget who He was and His gifts. And I think when Satan goes and tempts us, I think that's it. And I wonder if you might consider this week the gifts that God has given you and how Satan might attack them. He didn't care whether Jesus ate or not. He just didn't want him to believe who He was. And I think that's something that He does with us. Lord bless you. Thanks for taking time. We'll see you next week.